are back. Welcome back to the Chemist Confessions podcast. I'm Victoria.
And I'm Gloria.
And this is a human conversation on all the skincare science we talk about on the daily. And today is a little different, as you can see.
Yep, today is the first episode of 2025. And we're going to do things a little differently today because we realized that we have a lot of new listeners. Some of you,
Welcome.
Yep. Some of you may have stumbled on us. And we just realized that you might not have any idea who we are.
Yeah,
what we do, what our philosophy are. Why are these chicks talking about skincare science anyway?
Yeah.
So given the topic at hand, we thought this is a better place to do our recording. This is our humble little lab and where we actually spend most of our time.
So today, we'd like to take the time to explain to you our chemist philosophy on analyzing skincare and even the skincare science. We'll be walking through our Decode.il and Decode.claim philosophy. The goal here really is so that hopefully you'll walk away with a lot more context to all of our ingredient science and skincare science deep dives. And honestly, a lot of really good tips on how to assess your skincare like us and just be even better at finding good skincare. So the goal is you understand us more and you understand your skincare more. So with that, we should get right into our first section.
Yep, the first section, we can't get away from this before diving into the actual science and how we feel about everything without discussing all the experts you might see on the interwebs.
Yeah.
Victoria and I are chemists by trade, and that I think is not the most popular type of skincare expert you might see there. You might see a lot of dermatologists, you might see a lot of estheticians. Chemists, we do something completely different here. And what we do is kind of like this, a little bit of a sneak peek behind us is we create products that go on your face. Ultimately, this kind of goes beyond in the labs, thinking about tinkering with the beaker and whatnot. Because the reality is, and you might have heard of me kind of lament about this on the podcast here and there, which is we do a lot of reading, a lot of research.
Yeah, and I think it's research to create the formulas and then so much testing from the formulas to the compatibility of how these formulas interact with their packaging, making sure they're shelf stable and honestly safe for the consumer to use. And then even in assisting the actual scale up of formulas to make sure that you can go from a humble lab bench to a 1,000-ton batch. So because of that, we have a super intimate knowledge with skincare products and is why our point of view seems to be really catching on with people and seem to really be enjoyed by people just trying to do a little more research to find better skincare.
Long story short, chemists are definitely the people who can best answer what goes into that bottle that you're using. Next, you might see a lot of estheticians out there, and we love and to us, they are really great with just, to me, it's their insights on not just in-office treatment, but just the number of faces that they touch and see every day. There's something about their experience that gives a very different angle to chemists or even dermatologists.
Totally. I think we sometimes like to call them your personal skin therapist, sometimes your fairy godmother, because of your relationship with your esthetician. Ultimately, they are actually tracking how your skin is developing over time. And the really good ones, you'll sit in their chair and they'll be like, what did you do?
Yeah.
And what happened to you?
And I think you will absolutely know when you found the ST for you is like Victoria's. I think, I guess the best way to highlight it is with a little bit of a mini story, is that when you go in and let's say your ST is performing a facial, a peel, a roller, whatever you're doing, you can tell, and sometimes they'll explain to you, some of the emotions on your face is just slightly different. Because they're like, oh, there's like, my husband went into our favorite ST friend, Angela, and got a facial. And she just was able to find scar tissues from years of acne that wasn't even showing up on the surface. So she changed up the way she was micro needling certain spots to kind of give his face a more tailored treatment. And that again is sometimes why we shy away from talking about home level treatments that mimic what you get in office, because we truly believe that level of personal touch makes the real difference.
Totally. And then finally, there are your derms. These guys that spend years in school actually studying skin conditions. And Gloria and I truly believe that everyone can really bring their expertise into like the skin puzzle, right? And derms really come in when it comes to diagnosing skin conditions like severe acne, eczema, rosacea, all your skin history. And also your internal health and how that can pair with how it reflects on skin. And then additionally, your mole care, right? So everyone has their arena, and hopefully that gives you an idea of, I think the goal for us to touch on this is so that you know which expert you might want to go to for the question that you have. Because Gore and I are happy to tell you there's certain questions where like, this is way better for a derm. A really good esthetician might be the better solution.
Yeah.
So that's how that goes.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I feel like this is like the underlying elephant in the room, which is there are a lot of experts out there that will kind of branch out and talk about certain things that they might not know as much about. And the internet's a wall place. We have experts and we have experts, and this is just
Audio listeners, that's experts in quotes.
so. Of course, this is just a way to kind of put a more critical lens on some of the videos that you might stumble upon when you're scrolling through. And last but not least, I do want to comment on the next tier of influencers or just videos you might watch on the interwebs, which is just random people, just influencers. They're average everyday people. I actually don't want to discredit all of those videos because we have also talked to seeing people who are very thoughtful in their approach,
Super methodical.
very methodical and very experienced. And at the end of the day, if you stumble on one that aligns with your own skin quirks, it's honestly always good to take inspiration.
Totally.
It's just going back to everything we just described in terms of the other experts. When we're talking about in office, when we're talking about ingredient compatibility or diagnosing for your maybe skin condition that maybe need prescriptions, that's not what those people are for. They're more like your camaraderie on your skin journey.
Yeah. And finally, I think just kind of an insight into us as chemists, like chemist confession chemists. I think when Gloria and I first started, we definitely can proudly say we were skincare users first before being chemists. And then after we became chemists, then we became brand founders. And I think so that you kind of understand why we speak to education the way we do is because when we first started, we're like, we've got this great perspective. We're users, we're chemists and formulators, and we're brand founders. We kind of understand the pros and cons and the plight of each perspective. And then now that was the original goal. But then we can honestly tell you that most of the time it's the three just like butting heads with each other. And long story short, I'm very glad that there's two of us so that there is like, we can definitely tell you as we do research, constant debating, constant existential questions on the content and how we put it together. So hopefully that gives you an idea of our side of things.
Yeah, so that's a lot on the experts out there you might encounter and who we are, the role we play in those sea of experts. And before we move on to decoding label, helping everyone find better products, let's take a quick break.
Guys, finally, Balm Voyage is back. Did we say beginning of January? We meant end of January.
I feel like for our long-term followers, they know to take that date with a grain of salt. But you've probably heard us on multiple occasions discuss the saga that is the Balm Voyage. Long story short, nothing ambitious usually goes very smoothly, but we are super proud to finally have our occlusive champion back in all of its glory. It's gotten quite a glow up both inside and out.
So not only does Balm Voyage look different, it uses a 50% PCR tube and is now fully recyclable, but the formula itself also has one more active, and that is in the form of our Shea complex that tackles chapped skin. That's on top of our whopping 1% ceramide NP and our potent Boswellia serrata soother. So if you've been wanting to try this balm, and we know there's a few of you that's been waiting for a really long time.
Sorry.
Please use our brand new promo code CCPodcast 2025 for 15% off your first order and get your hands on this cult favorite dry skin and soothing salve. Enjoy, guys.
And we are back. Let's talk about the stuff that is going to help you decode like a champ. We can't get away from this topic. So the number one thing we're going to talk about is the percentages that are now a lot more prevalent on the packaging.
Well, when we first started, we want to tell people how to avoid getting skincare that only has a cat sneeze worth of actives. But now the pendulum has swung in the completely opposite direction. So this is why, if you've been with us since the beginning, we've taken a step back from the decode that aisle a little bit.
Yeah.
However, we should talk about when does concentration matter and when maybe you should be more skeptical and when you should completely just don't even think about it.
Yep. So the number one thing that percentages are still most relevant in is still active ingredient. So we talk about retinoids all the time.
Yeah.
So for retinol in particular, the effective percentage is between 0.1 to 1%. And that's something that you should really pay attention to, not only to make sure you find a product that works, but doesn't flake your skin. So you don't accidentally jump from 0.1% all the way up to 1%. That doesn't make sense for your skin journey. Retinol's example is very, very important to know the percentage. But of course, given that the cosmetic industry can be hard to wade through. But of course, this percentage only applies to retinol. Every active comes with their own range. And this is what Victoria and I work really hard on in terms of our charts, our little visuals, and our dedicated episodes on active ingredients. So we can talk through the ranges that you should be looking for. Because while it matters, it does take a little bit of know-how with every ingredient. Every active just so different. So that's kind of how we feel about that.
Yeah. And I think because of the push for transparency, which is great, some of the transparency can start to get quite confusing. So, we have a realm where we say sometimes you want to raise an eyebrow too. And I think this is more of a personal thing for me, and this is going to evolve, is the general ppm lingo you might find. A lot of this happens in K-beauty, where it feels like, yes, you get a sense of concentration, but it's not very helpful. And a lot of times it has to do with some of their extracts. And I think some of these extracts, the concentration hasn't actually been dialed in. However, we are seeing that there's more and more clear-cut ppm lingo happening. So we are optimistic that this will evolve. However, yeah, we just want to put it out there. You're going to see like ppm, ppb. These are all quite low percentages.
Yeah, just for context, the typical percentages is usually how we talk about concentration.
Yeah.
Skincare is the most common way of just in papers, in formulation. That's usually how we measure everything out. 1% is 1 over 100. ppm stands for parts per million. So it's 1 over 1 million. So my theory is that it started because they want to make the number sound bigger. I think I still remember this really humorous.
Because we, on the industry side, we do not talk in the lingo of ppm. Very rarely, especially when we are formulating in lab.
Yeah, and I still remember this one kind of humorous Tony Moly product.
Yes.
Where they have 1 ppm retinol, and we're like, it's like, thank you for the transparency, but people, it is 0.0000, and I lost count of number of 1% retinol. So it's things like that made us raise an eyebrow.
Yeah.
But like Victoria mentioned, nowadays, sometimes you'll get really big numbers now in ppm, like 100,000 ppm, 50,000. And that is a very significant percentage. It's just that number can get a little confusing, just something to keep in mind. And something Victoria dropped really quick earlier, which is ppb, parts per billion, 1 over 1 billion.
The other arena where we think you can consider raising an eyebrow to is actually really high concentrations. The most egregious one is a lot of some of the retinol products. I mean, we've seen like 4% retinol, things like that. Ignore it. Like, most likely they're claiming like retinol, not even the actual active itself, but probably the active and the constituents that it comes in. So that's why it's like, that's when percentages really don't get aren't very helpful. And the other thing is things like, I think toners can be kind of confusing as well. You can definitely buy toners that are like the quote, like in the 80% of like extract. And I think in that sense, just understand that a lot of extracts, how they are processed, they're going to come in water and glycol. So, in that sense, like the actual active amount is also, you're not quite certain. So that's where we're kind of like, not a really big.
Yeah, it's like, oh, hey, big number. That's really cool. So,
Yeah.
But ultimately, yeah, it's like probably not that serious. And we'll say the one little exception to this raising eyebrow to really high concentration is your AHAs. So things like glycolic acid and lactic acid, when you have it at really high levels, like 20, 30, 40%, it's used as a peel. So how you approach this high percentage is completely different to, say, a 7% in a toner.
Yeah.
And that concentration not only matters, but the high percent really gives you a clue as to what it does for your skin.
Yeah. And I think to sum all that up is, if you do encounter high percentages, this is where how you use should be the next follow-up question. Yeah. And then finally, we have like straight up percentage does not matter and you should not be calculating. And for us, that is time and time again, we have to tell people sunscreens. Like, yes, do not calculate filter percentage. Do not try to question the levels, because all that requires testing, validation. We can tell you firsthand that the littlest thing you do to a formula can really skew SPF values. So with that, just take our word. No
Yeah,
questions asked.
we do get these questions once in a while. Like, hey, this sunscreen is SPF blah, 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 but it only has 12% zinc. What gives? A lot gives.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
That's a lot going.
I mean, as a chemist, we can tell you that it's almost a rite of passage.
Yeah.
Pulling your hair out at those like quick SPF screening like machines because you're like, I didn't do anything. I just bumped up the thickener by 0.5%. What do you mean it just went from 35 to a 5? All the formulas you buy on the market, especially the good ones, they've been through the gamut of tests. And I can guarantee you most of them are probably like the 120th iteration of getting it right. So yeah.
Moving on, we should talk about the act of decoding that ingredient list. When is it helpful? When is it not super helpful? And also when you should just not even try to decode the ingredient list. We found decoding the ingredient list is helpful for things like if you have a skin allergy. And just want to remind you that when it comes to allergies, there's no one size fits all scenario. What you're allergic to does not mean what your friend is allergic to, and vice versa. Skin is so personal. So through our journey, we have met people that somehow discovered that they are allergic to glycols. Like it could just shock you what is a trigger for somebody's skin. So in that sense, decoding that aisle, very helpful.
Yeah, and if you feel like you're stuck in this limbo of my skin's so sensitive, so many products give me issue, I've been cross-referencing all these ingredient lists, I do not know what's giving me an issue, it's probably time that you go to a derm office and do a ingredient allergens test. It might really change your perspective on skincare.
Totally.
And a lot of times, like Victoria mentioned, some of the triggers are not the common ones that sensitive skin-friendly brands filter out. It can be the randomest thing.
Totally. The next thing is decoding that IL can really help you keep tabs on overused ingredients. And we can tell you there are definitely a lot of brands that like to throw in certain ingredients into everything. Some of the biggest culprits are things like niacinamide and salicylic acid. And being able to kind of keep tabs on what products have these ingredients can kind of help you understand maybe what your skin is going through. Maybe you have too much of a good thing, and that happens quite a lot.
Yeah, I think niacinamide and salicylic are definitely really good examples. If you have acneic skin, I just remember like going through, my husband told me his favorite products from his teenage years. And it's like salicylic wash, salicylic lotion, salicylic treatment.
And it's all 2%.
Yeah, and it's all 2%. And he's like, oh, I mean, I guess it is okay. So he wound up with dry skin patches, but the acne's still there because it's all just salicylic.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like another thing that it could be helpful is just deciding between two products. I think especially a really good example is you're trying to decide between two hyperpigmentation products. Just looking at hyperpigmentation, notorious for pummeling in a bouquet of actives, rightfully so, because it really requires a cocktail. But when you look at them, you can kind of get a sense of, again, ingredients you might already have, actives you're already using, maybe duplicates, or sometimes what will happen is you'll find ones that really are more in the, like, let's say more nourishing, or even more in the anti-wrinkle, anti-aging space versus another one that seems to truly be in the hyperpigmentation space. So sometimes getting a sense of that can help you decide, especially when you're just like in the shopping aisle and you're like, I need to make a decision. I can't decide.
I think an ingredient that really highlights this is glycolic acid fermentation. There's so many serums that have glycolic
That's
acid.
so true.
Right? But you might already have it in your toner, and this is something you're like, well, that's not gonna add anything to my routine. So
Exactly.
but kind of continuing the same train of thought, I have really dry skin. Where I find decoding that IL to be pretty helpful is moisturizers, and especially when you're comparing moisturizers. There's a lot of ways for Victoria and I to whip up a really nourishing, thick cream, and it's not even that moisturizing. There are just a lot of toolboxes that chemists have to manipulate texture to how we want it to look and feel without keeping long-term effect in mind. Not saying that that's what all chemists do.
Yeah, that's not our goal, but sometimes that's what the protocol calls for. It's what the brief calls for. So
Right, exactly. And usually those texturizers are meant to tie the bow on a product. But sometimes when you're that means when you're looking for moisturizer, thicker cream doesn't automatically mean it is moisturizing. And something that claims to be an all-in-one moisturizer doesn't really have all ingredients. A classic example is a lot of creams is thick, but when you go through the aisle, it doesn't have any true occlusives. it doesn't really have petrolatum, waxes, butters, or a relatively low amount. So you know that creaminess is there. It might give you a physical shield, but long-term moisturization benefits might be a little questionable. It's something I go through a lot when I try out creamy products. And then the second thing is you might encounter a good thick cream with lots of waxes and butters, awesome amounts of occlusives, and you have to go down to the middle of the list to find even one humectant.
Yeah.
And that means it's for you, it's not a balanced moisturizer, or at least it can't be a standalone moisturizer.
Totally. And with that, let's talk about when decoding the aisle might not be that helpful. I have one very clear one, and it's definitely cleansers.
Yeah.
This is also why our content around cleansers is a lot more general, because cleansers are typically blends. They're blends of surfactants. This is why singling out surfactants sometimes is not, unless, there's definitely cohorts that don't do well with specific surfactants. But in terms of speaking to the science of the specific blend, very difficult. So this is where we're kind of like, you could, maybe if you are able to identify surfactants you like, that's actually, I feel like expert level, like 201, like that's several degrees higher of knowledge. So that's where we're kind of like, it's not that helpful.
100%. Even with our own projects, when we were creating the blank slate, we have a surfactant system, a couple key ones we identify, and we went through a lot of iteration with the surfactants we wanted to use. And there are some iterations that wound up being very stripping, and some that just the aspect, the use experience was pretty poor. So it takes a lot of finagling to get the balance that we want, and you'll be shocked at how different some of these iterations are using the same surfactants.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think the last arena that's probably not that helpful, and why even try a decode IL, it's just generally fun skincare where you're like, I don't need to know the science. This brings me joy.
Yeah, so things smell really nice, some mask, some science, and you're like, in my heart of heart, I don't think it's that legit, but it makes me very happy.
It's thoughts that bring joy.
Yeah, you know what? Today, I think kelp is going to be my secret found-out youth. You know what? You do you. And I really want to say that sometimes that is a part of it.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with doing a mask just for fun because it has some glitter in it and makes your day,
Basically, don't become a crotchety-owned chemist, jaded chemist that no longer can have that same innocent joy in skincare.
100%.
All right. With that actually covers our Decode That Label section. We should take a quick break, and then we are going to move on into claims because these are very juicy. Let's do the animal fun fact corner.
Da, 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 da. All right, today's Victoria's turn.
All right. So, thought about it. We've covered a lot of very depressing topics. We've covered animals that are basically assholes to the ecosystem and the earth.
Animal crime type of.
Animal crime. I like that. Yes, exactly. So today, I actually wanted to talk about, it turns out that just last year, thousands of new animal, plant, and fungi species have been discovered. And so I felt like that was mildly uplifting, consider we always hear about endangered species and suffering ecosystems. So today, I'm actually going to talk to you about the eyelash viper.
So they actually got lashes or what?
Yeah. I had that question too. But basically, it has a kind of like structure on the top of its eye. These snakes. And it's really cute, actually. I know there's definitely people out there that don't like snakes, but I find them both actually quite beautiful. And eyelash viper to just have this like kind of architecture on their eyebrow, which is why they call them the eyelash viper. I don't actually have a lot to share about this animal because obviously it's just discovered.
Yeah.
But I do find that when reading about it, that the people who discover and write about these animals are truly like something else. And basically last year they had discovered 5 new species of eyelash viper. This was discovered in Colombia and Ecuador. I'll pull up a picture of what they call the yellow pink morph, or they call it Rahim's eyelash pit viper.
So exotic.
Yes. And what I found really entertaining was the species is actually named after Prince Rahim Aga Khan.
Oh.
I Googled it, and he's actually the Prince of Switzerland. I would not have guessed with that name, but
none of that really clicks in my head, but
Yeah. So with that, what they found is they discovered this type of eyelash viper in the remote and pristine rainforest. However, these rainforests are controlled by drug cartel at the border between Ecuador and Colombia. So it's actually quite difficult for people, one, to learn more, venture into that area, but also incredibly difficult for initiatives to basically conservation efforts for the species because rainforests are kind of under attack, right? So in that sense, I was like, wow, discovered species already so complicated.
So hardcore.
Yeah.
But hey, listen, man, you do you, sell your coke, do what you gotta do. I'm just here for this thing. Like, seriously, just here for this thing.
And it's described, the way they describe it is a complex to visit due to the presence of drug cartels.
That's a huge euphemism.
Yeah. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting was they talk about the venom of these vipers. And I'm going to read this to you verbatim and let this be representation of the dedication of these people. The venom of some, perhaps all, of the new species of vipers is considerably less lethal and hemorrhagic than that of the typical Central American eyelash viper, says Lucas Bustamante, a co-author of the study on these new species. Lucas was bitten in the finger by the Rahim's eyelash pit viper while taking pictures during a research expedition in 2013. I experienced intermittent local pain, dizziness, and swelling, but recovered shortly after receiving 3 doses of antivenom in less than 2 hours after the bite, with no scar left behind, says Bustamante.
I need a dose of that man's positivity. Just a taste by the flesh wound. This is fine. I probably won't die.
Yeah, so I again, I don't have a lot to share about the actual pit vipers, except I think they're beautiful creatures and they have already a very complex environment. But holy cow, the dedication of some of these, biologists and, their mission to protect these species is just incredible. I'm so in awe of that.
I really like the comparison to other vipers. So I'm assuming this guy's gotten bitten by all the vipers.
Yes, smart, exactly.
Less hemorrhage than before. I think that's a plus.
Anyways, that's the animal fun. All right, let's wrap this up with a deep dive. Everyone stretch out. A deep dive into Decode That Claim, because there's quite a bit to unpack here. This could totally be like a 3-hour episode, but we're going to try to sum up all of the good stuff. All right.
Yes. Okay. So this really takes a lot. So we'll try to keep this brief, but you will encounter a lot of this when you're shopping for products. And there are a lot of products now that do clinical tests, which is fantastic, not discounting any of that. But a lot of times to decipher their clinicals, their testings, take a little bit of work. So some of the materials you might encounter, the number one thing that everyone loves to use and see is before and after pictures. It's a complicated topic. I think they're powerful testimonials, and I will say the number one problem we have with it is a lot of them are just not done with any level of control lighting. I've gotten to the point I've seen stuff so egregious in terms of like the before picture not lining up and lighting is drastically different. Someone had makeup afterwards, all of that. To me, it's so egregious. I've gotten to the point of, you know what? If it's a selfie picture and it's off the right angle and right lighting, I say it's something.
Yeah, it's the bar sometimes can be very low. So in terms of before and afters, how we would recommend navigating it is, yes, visuals can be so convincing. You really want to look for more standardized photos. Really the best and most ideal scenario, standardized photos in pretty much the same symmetry and direction of the face. Sometimes you can tell like the angles are completely off side by side. That's how you know they're either done by phone or, it's a consumer's perception. They're probably using an app, So we really try to highlight those.
Mm-hmm.
However, because now social media is utilized more and more, and those types of phone photos become more utilized, we would say if you do see those, look for more data. Like we would see that as like, oh, interesting. Let's keep going. So that's one side. The next side is, you heard me drop the line, consumer perception.
Yes. So this is the more common type of air quotes clinicals you'll see. Okay? And again, this is one of those categories that we think it's something. It's kind of nice, but it's not the end all be all. How these tests are done is study subjects go home with their study participants get these products. They go home with the user for some time, anywhere. I've seen anywhere from 10 days to 4 or 8 weeks. And when they get back, they do a survey before they go in for tests, and they go in for another survey at the very end of the study. And you get statistics like 86% of the people agree.
Their numbers are usually very nice. Yeah.
89% of people agree. 96% of the people think, that kind of lingo is how you know that it's a survey-based consumer perception study. I will say where we feel like this falls a little short is it can be very manipulative, or it's like easier to get those really high stats
Yeah.
just based on how people ask these questions and how and the surveys are long, and you definitely get the best looking 3 answers that people have given. Yeah, so the ability to cherry pick is that much higher here. So we will say it's something, but again, kind of like the BNAs, if we see this, we will hope that there is something else.
Yeah. And I did want to follow up. It's like, it's definitely obviously a more standardized testing, right? You've got people coming in, they've given a very strict protocol, they fill out their quiz. So in that sense, I would say that, this is not to feel like, oh, you could just hand out products to strangers on the street
Yeah.
and then have them come back. So, but we definitely see this as one tier below actual clinical testing. What we mean by that is, and this is where there's a little bit of confusion when we use this term, brands will actually pay for their own clinical testing on products because people feel like the brand paid for it.
They have to say nice things about it.
Yeah, there's a skepticism and, general doubt that that data is actually objective. However, we can tell you that one, that's definitely not true. First, definitely keep in mind there are plenty of brands out there that don't do any clinical testing at all and are very successful. So to do clinical testing is an added cost, and we can tell you firsthand that's very expensive. And with that, how these clinical tests are run is they're usually working with a third-party CRO. These sites are the ones that are, handling all the subjects, and usually they are blinded. And so with that, we just want to kind of give you all some clarity and understand, kind of peek behind the curtain on how some of this testing is done.
Yeah, for sure. And while the brand does get to choose how they may present some of the
Sure.
that's definitely a factor. But at the same time, you already know that by having conducted a clinical test, and we should mention that the biggest difference of the data you get from between the clinical like this versus a consumer perception is that you get a peak of the degree of improvement you can expect. So things like instrumentation measurements and expert grading, these are numbers that a brand cannot cheat. They might be presenting the nicer looking ones, but at the same time, they're all still very real numbers.
Yes.
Cannot be fluffed with like, how do you feel today? She said she feels good about the product.
She said she saw results.
Yeah, the numbers don't look as sexy, but getting their way out of how you get numbers like 30, 15% improvement in the appearance of crow's feet, 13% improvement in the volume of wrinkles. But those are measured numbers with precise instruments, and we definitely place a little bit more weight on these data, regardless of who sponsors them, because someone has to sponsor these tests.
Yeah, it's definitely for us. You can see why we dedicate a lot of the podcast episodes to products that come with clinical testing. There's just a lot more transparency, and there's honestly so much more information for users to kind of understand how keyword might, this perform on my skin and to what degree. So measurability, so key for us. Yeah. And then we should talk about like academia publishing and those clinicals.
Yeah, so there's a lot of those. And to be honest, you probably encounter most of those on podcasts like ours. We try to focus our podcast on these studies because they might not be stuff that average consumers go out and look for, have the time and bandwidth to go through and dissect all the data. They do give a lot of fresh new perspective on it. They give a lot of great data on sometimes individual ingredients, not necessarily finished products. Sometimes we'll find brands that publish the results in these journals, which is kind of an underlying positive, kind of like it passes at least this journals, their standards of their whatever their internal standards are. There are also a lot of academics that publish there. That can get a little complex because some of them, people don't do skincare research in a vacuum. Like today, I wake up and I'm in Duke and I really feel like testing retinol. Usually that does have maybe some upstream group, maybe a supplier that's interested in this. Maybe it is an academic study that is someone working on their PhD paper that published a study. While these can come from very, very a wide range of sponsors and reasons why these tests are done to begin with, they give a slightly more objective lens to everything that's going on in skincare.
And I think also some of the testing can be showcased in a way that you definitely can't showcase in actual marketing communication. So this is why Gloria and I will also try to share some of that data. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we've definitely heard, people ask us questions, but like, oh, but then isn't that mean that it's industry led? Like, does that in a sense corrupt the actual, performance and how things are actually performed and claimed? And, in a way, yes, but we'd also like to remind everyone that in terms of the tiers of research, when you think about drugs versus cosmetics, a lot of this will have to be industry driven. And we think that's okay. Long story short, skincare will always be less supported in every aspect than actual topical drugs. However, through some of the academia publication, what we do really like is clinical testing and the transparency behind it. Usually, the size of studies can be bigger. The way a study is created, whether it's placebo controlled, there's maybe even a positive control, or even better that we love is a lot of these like really just solid comparison studies. Rare, but awesome. All of this you can find in these journals and something that we often share in our episodes.
And I'm just going to toot our own horns a little bit. If you're new to Chemist Confessions and you're on the fence about whether or not you like this podcast, this is also what drives this podcast is going through this data because we know that not all of that is very digestible. So we do the filter. We look for the clinicals with the bigger size, the placebo. And when it's an industry-driven paper, you might have your doubts about the validity of it, but we go through the methodology, we go through the size and the takeaways, because a lot of times you'll hear us on this podcast flame the conclusion because we just don't think the data matches the overly sponsor-led. So that's kind of why we do this.
Yeah, consider us the critical lens of even these publications.
100%.
I cannot tell you how many bad, terrible papers there are out there.
Many times.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
I was going to say one of us usually lead one episode. We'll take turns.
Yeah.
And let's say if I'm doing research, then many times I'm like, oh my God, Victoria, get in here. You got to read this paper. It's so dumb.
Yeah. And I feel like so many times my sentiment is like, I cannot believe they wasted resources on doing this kind of study. So all I have to say is obviously a lot of due diligence, a lot of research, a lot of discerning good data and bad data. So yeah, with that, we should mention, just kind of give you guys an idea of the type of testing that we talk about and kind of how we rate them. There's going to be in vitro, which is usually in a test tube or in a cell culture. You'll usually hear about like fibroblasts and all of that in that kind of testing. There's also in vivo via an animal model. Sadly, yes, they will test on actual, usually rodent models. And then finally, there's the actually gem of data, which is in vivo actual human testing, where they're actually testing on human skin. So hopefully that gives you an idea of where we rank the best, which is human, to the worst, which is in vitro. In vitro for us is considered just that green light to keep on researching. And sadly, a lot of ingredients don't really make it out of that phase. Yeah. All right. So hopefully that gives you a lay of the land in terms of decoding claims, also kind of how we view both the marketing side, brand testing, as well as academia and lab research. Let's talk about what that means for us, Chemist Confessions, our philosophy, and even just how we create educational content.
Yep. So like we mentioned, everything we talked about in this episode, we go through with every episode.
Huge sweep.
Huge sweep. So anything from products. Okay, so let's say we're talking about azelaic acid. Which brands have done clinical testing on their own blend? If not, then what pharmaceuticals have done testing on their blend? And all the way to academic publishing. Studies from 1986, we'll consider all the way to studies from 2024. So it is a really wide sweep. And that said, we are just two people. We do our own research. So a lot of times, sometimes it takes us a long time to come up with one episode because we try to find as much as we can from different angles. And of course, we try to start every episode research with, okay, let's look for inhuman clinicals. Because sometimes we don't have time or the bandwidth to go into that early stage in vitro data. But sometimes we'll spend
That's
hours.
all we got.
Yeah.
Like, oh God, we're in vitro hell. No, this is where we are now.
Happen many a times.
Yeah.
So after we do the big sweep, then we're like, all right, now we gotta link in on what we know as industry insiders.
Yeah. So we pair that with our work experience, our knowledge of just the ingredient library that is available to us. There are millions. And the other thing that's key to know is a single ingredient can have hundreds of different sourcing.
Yeah.
And sourcing, I think, has been a theme in some of our recent episodes. Sourcing matters. So with that, we try to marry that with consider it like our expertise and real life application. And how can all of this data combine into executable actions for you guys in terms of buying skincare?
And thirdly, we've kind of loosely mentioned this here and there, but we have our internal rank data editors. And this is how we rank ingredients too as we are doing our research. the gold star is, I don't think it's disputable. I think most of you can agree, is ingredients with brand data, published data, data from 60, 70, 80.
AKA the retinoid category.
Yeah. Large clinicals against different products, clinicals that's been benched against different ingredients, the undisputed gold star. But most things will filter under it. So roughly speaking, the top will be anything with a human clinical, and human clinicals with any comparative data, one-to-one comparison testing that gives us a rank or something to kind of gauge against. Super good.
I was going to say an example of this is usually in hyperpigmentation, a lot of new actives will get benched against hydroquinone. And for us, like, that is very helpful because a lot of times, yes, you can have a single clinical showcasing your ingredients benefits, but how does that measure up? And I think ultimately to get a sense of the spectrum of activity is very hard, honestly. So that, yeah.
So after that, it's human clinical, no comparison, just by itself, and it does something. And okay, it's something. And that is a broad category. I will say a lot of ingredients fall in this category. It might have one promising paper. You don't fully understand how it compares to other ingredients, but it does something. And I will say the longer I do this podcast, the more I look at those ingredients from here. Because we have the next tier, which is there is one test tube and I can't find anything else.
Yeah, and that's usually you'll be able to tell because there's pain in our voices when we're actually doing that ingredient deep dive. Yeah, so hopefully that gives you an idea of how we kind of rank some of the data behind the ingredients we talk about. And then the next thing is, ultimately we do, although the tone, y'all are like, y'all's tone, but we really try to be as objective as possible. And just sometimes it's really hard. Just like, as you guys can feel, sometimes there's just no data and the claims can be so strong, would be putting it nicely. So the reason why, when we first started and we were starting to create content, we really wanted to just share the data, like for everyone to be like, this is how it is. This is the lay of the land. Yes, you might feel like it's lacking, but this is just how it goes. And ultimately that's for you guys to decide, come to your own conclusion. And honestly, if you come to a different conclusion than ours, that's okay. A really good, I feel like, and I feel like a way of an example of this would be like, hey, I'm really interested in this ingredient, but the chemists seem like there's not a ton of science, but there's like a little bit of testing. You know what? That's good enough for me. I'm going to try it. That's totally fine.
Yeah, and honestly, I have to give a shout out for all of our audience. I'm putting together episodes like the ginseng episode. It's a classic case of there's something but really nothing.
Those are ginseng for a long time.
Yeah, there's just a lot to go through. That episode was probably set the record for the amount of time and research we put into it as of last year. But it will not be 35 minutes. Because it's just really hard to distill anything from it.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of really nice comments of like, oh, we really appreciate you doing the hard work. Haha, it's kind of funny that there's nothing. I'm gonna buy so lost. And honestly, like, that's definitely okay. And
I think that makes me feel like it was worth it.
right, like, I think people enjoy the nerding out aspect and appreciate us keeping it real.
Yeah.
And going back to what Victoria was saying about how we tried our best to stay objective.
I really do.
We do. And I will mention that I think we've been doing this for some time now. And I do think some of my stands have like not wavered, but shifted a little bit over time. I think I've become a little bit more forgiving towards like these actors with like mediocre data. Because I just think if you hold everything to the retinoid standard,
So everything will fail.
you're just gonna be disappointed. But at the same time, I feel like, but science, skincare science especially, should be a little bit fun. We're in this industry where, for better or for worse, it's not as rigorous, intensive to market as say pharma. But what that means is there's a lot of opportunities. Just like, okay, there's something exciting here, something exciting there. It's our job to kind of filter that excitement, but at the same time, when we do that, it's just the reality of it where we have to, just not everything can be at the right level. So if I objectively judge everything against a retinoid, every episode I'm gonna be grumpy. So
It doesn't make for a very good episode.
no. So all I have to say is I think we present the data objectively, but we also
We do laugh at bad data.
yes.
That for sure is, it's not about objectively look at the ingredient, but bad data deserves some criticism.
Stay tuned for the next episode. We got some bad data for y'all. So I guess that's like a bit of a tangent, but all that kind of sums up our last point, which is our whole point and our whole drive doing this podcast and all of our content is that skincare science should be fun. It is a category that's rarely black and white. And
Rarely.
we don't,
In all caps.
right, we don't do any of this and laugh at the bad data so that people can have a crusade against a particular ingredient. We just wanted to, shine a light on everything that's done in the industry.
Yeah. So I think that's also, hopefully something that you guys can expect with our content or have realized is we really don't take hard stances. And usually when it really, if the statement is truly that, I would say, what's the word I'm looking for?
Sweeping,
Yeah.
hard, yeah.
Blanket statements definitely deserve lots of eyebrow raising, lots of questions, because that's just the nature of the science in skincare. There's this elusiveness from the industry side that we really want to be able to shine a light on for you guys. And there's also just a lack of support because it cannot compete to some of the other hard sciences. So in that sense, ultimately, that pretty much sums up our Chemist Confessions chemist philosophy. We really hope that this was helpful for you guys, maybe a way to rethink claims that you hear, maybe content that you're hearing, but also hopefully have a couple tips in there on how you're evaluating your own skincare. But with that, that's just an intro to this podcast season. We hope you guys enjoy it.
Yeah, a little preview. We're going to be diving into our regular format next episode. It's going to be about PDRN. So, a great data, fun data. So, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for staying with us for 2025. We will see you all next week. Bye.